Okay, so thank you all for joining tonight's meeting. Tonight we're going to be talking about theme in literature, in short stories particularly. Now, usually when you write a short story, it's a good idea to have some sort of general theme in mind. It's hard to teach old dog new tricks. Love hurts. Now, there's a difference between a subject and a theme. Subject is love story. Subject is friendship. Subject is old age. Subject is war. Now, theme is what does the story say about that subject. War makes it impossible to make a correct choice. Love hurts. It's better to have one good friend than many, many acquaintances. Old age is a stage of life sometimes where you wish you could start all over again, but you really kind of don't. So do you see the difference between like subject, theme? Subject might be barbecue. Theme might be don't try this at home. Maybe the house catches on fire or something, and the subject would be a barbecue, and the theme would be don't try this at home. Okay? So the theme isn't really a message. You never want to preach at your reader. You never want to talk down to them, never. But the theme is what point are you going to try to get across? And you never, ever, ever want to beat your reader over the head with it. I don't think any of the stories in this collection beat you over the head with it. So the stories that we're talking about tonight are On the Rainy River and Drinking Coffee Elsewhere. So we're going to start with On the Rainy River by Tim O'Brien. And this is part of one story out of Tim O'Brien's collection, The Things They Carry. And that is what's called a short story cycle. All of the short stories kind of fit together. They have the same characters in them, the same themes, the same settings. It's an amazing collection. I definitely recommend it. It's called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. So, and then the short story, The Things They Carried, is just a list of the things they carried. But by giving a list of that, you see what they're carrying internally, psychologically. It's not about a heavy rifle or a picture of their girlfriend. It's what does that say about someone when they're carrying a picture of their girlfriend in their backpack, okay? And one student before I started the recording had talked about how Tim O'Brien tends to be writing a lot of summary, and it is. It is very much summary. But you'll also notice how he gets you into those scenes. You're on that boat with him and his friends when they paddle out to the Canadian border. You're out there with them on that river, okay? And I said I was going to show you how he did it, but now I'm not really sure I can. I'll just read some of it out loud. This is not a newspaper report. We spent 6 days together at the Tip Top Lodge, just the two of us. Tourist season was over, and there were no boats on the river, and the wilderness seemed to withdraw into a great, permanent stillness. Over those 6 days, Elroy Birdall and I took most of our meals together. In the mornings, we sometimes went out on long hikes into the woods, and at night we played Scrabble or listened to records or sat reading in front of his big stone fireplace. At times, I felt the awkwardness of an intruder, but Elroy accepted me into his quiet routine without fuss or ceremony. All right, there's a good example of how it departs from reporting. He tells us he accepted him without fuss or ceremony. Now, that's something that direct, straight reporting would not say. Direct, straight reporting would have just said, we sat at the table and sprayed Cabell. He always won. He would get out the dictionary sometimes. He spelled long words. I spelled short ones. Okay? And then he said, he accepted me into his quiet routine without fuss or ceremony. So there he has stepped out of reporting and he has shown you something, okay? So scattered throughout the reporting, he's showing us things. And he's telling us what the point of this all is. Why was I there? Why alone? Why so preoccupied? That's not direct reporting. He's raising questions right there. So this may appear as though it's direct reporting, but it's not the kind of reporting that a beginner would do. Because here again, a beginner would say, he sat down on one end of the table, I sat down on the other. You know, he played the letter L in Scrabble, I played the letter A. All right? So, But tonight we're supposed to be talking about themes. So I want to hear what some of y'all thought maybe the theme was before I say so. And what you always want to remember whenever you read a short story, a novel, or watch a movie, there's no such thing as the theme. There isn't just one good theme unless it's not a very good show or a book. There's many good themes, and there's many correct themes. I'm not looking for the theme. I'm looking for a theme. Many, many, many things. Bobby might say this thing says that war is great, and Anthony might say this says war sucks, and y'all could both be correct because it's how you interpret the story to fit your theme that matters. Okay, as long as you can support it with something, you're okay. All right. So, who wants to come up with the theme that they thought of?
I'll go first. So
Okay.
this is Anthony, and one of the themes that I think I found, like, so I know that the subject is war, obviously.
Right.
And,
Good.
And the one of the themes that I found throughout the short story was this idea of like what is wrong and what is right. You know, is it right to go to war necessarily, or is it wrong? And just like the sort of struggle I guess there is between that and finding out if he's doing the right thing or if he's not doing the right thing. So I think that's just kind of one of the big questions that was brought up.
Yes, and I'll tell you one of the ways I had gotten the same theme out of that, because right here he even asked the reader directly, remember when he goes, what would you do?
Right.
And that invites you to consider what he should do, right?
Exactly.
And so it's very much like no matter what choice, there's no right answer. He can't win no matter what he does.
Right.
If he goes to war, he's supporting something he doesn't believe in. But if he doesn't go, he's a coward.
Yeah.
And most good war stories aren't about war. From Here to Eternity is not a war story. Catch-22 is not a war story. Bobby, what did you think?
Yeah, I think, like you're saying, it doesn't really necessarily have to do with like war all the time. Especially in this one, like repeatedly in the things he carried, he says, this is a love story. It's not a war story. A real love or a real war story is actually about love and stuff like that. So I think it really gets to that at the end of the chapter, when he ends with the words, I was a coward, I went to war. Not necessarily with that being war, but just being with, throughout the entire chapter, he outlines how he felt like he knew more about that war. He was the one who went to college and learned about these different perspectives about that war. And a lot of the, it sounds like kind of like, waving red, white, and blue, types who are really, really proud of their sons who have been drafted, whether their sons were actually happy about it or not. He's saying those people don't really get it like I do. So it's like by the end, when he says I'm a coward, it's more that idea of going against the grain sometimes takes a lot more courage, and it's cowardly to not stand up for what you want. But he's using that irony to get the theme across of normally we would think of someone, not going to war when they're supposed to as being cowardly, but he thinks it's more of like his inner being. So standing up for what you believe in and going against the grain.
And actually that's an excellent interpretation, because actually what that could also mean is that going to war within yourself, not really war, but going to war internally, going to war.
Right.
And so that he was a coward by going to the physical war, by going against that internal war. See what I'm saying? So either way, he was a cat. He would have seen himself as a coward.
Right.
And I think that's so hard to do.
Totally. Mm-hmm.
Now, what we want to remember is that even though we're all part of the things they carried, they're still considered individual short stories, and it's kind of important that we keep the genre straight, just because literary geeks do that. And you may eventually have a short story collection, and your short stories may fit together like his do, or they may fit together more loosely. I thought there was another theme about it, about how words are insufficient, that kind of, I know, that ties along with the other themes in the whole collection of short stories. The things they carried, you know, how the true war story is hard to tell, because he says in here, words are inefficient. Remember when he goes out to the river, he knows why the old man's taking him there, to give him the chance to think about it, or to run. There's the border right there, go. But they never say anything. And so I thought it was an interesting story, with the theme being words are insufficient.
Yeah, I can see that definitely, and kind of how they maybe the silence is more impactful than something that words could ever express. I think that's definitely a powerful theme.
Yeah, this would have been a horrible story if the man would have looked at him and said, "Okay, there's the border. Here's your chance, boy. I know what you've been thinking." Which a beginning writer would have done. A beginning writer would have done like that. And see, Anthony, there's another difference between reporting too, because a really experienced writer like O'Brien knows what not to tell the reader.
Gotcha.
No, not to announce. Oh, look, he said this. Because remember, many times throughout here, he says, I can't remember exactly what happened. Many times throughout here. Yeah. 6 days later, I wondered about this as a possible theme. If he said that maybe this story represents a small gesture of gratitude 20 years past due. And that would be called sort of this idea that the stories come into metafiction. It's a story about writing a story. And that's very hard for beginning writers to do too, because they come across sometimes as themselves trying to come up with a story. They're always, I'm sitting up at night and I've got a story due tomorrow. But so one theme of it would be that sometimes a debt sometimes we give people a personal debt through honoring them in a piece of art. You know, maybe that's the theme. A piece of art years later, whether they ever read it or not, they're still honored in it as is a form of gratitude that's as pure as a handshake. I could argue that. I could make an argument for that.
I was also curious about the thematic, not the thematic elements, but maybe what theme it could be trying to get at when he's in the boat with Elroy and he looks back at shore and he sees, I mean, a lot of people, you know, his parents, he sees like Abraham Lincoln and LBJ, and you know, just like a bunch of different characters from history, but also people from like his town. And he sees like a girl who died when he was in, I think, like 4th grade or something, who died of brain tumor. So it's such a kind of a strange collection of people and kind of eclectic group. And I mean, I feel like it could be saying something about community and the social pressures of community and stuff like that. But it could also be argued both ways, that they're kind of cheering for him to come back to the American soil, or it could be that they're trying to cheer him like, come on, make your decision, jump out of the boat, start swimming. So, or maybe the theme is like how our perception of ourselves and our own self-talk is actually, it's really just the regurgitation of society and what we're hearing from them. It just seems like such a strange hallucination to not have any real bearing on the theme.
Yeah, I felt like the same thing, but I was a little lost at what to, you know, I wasn't sure whether it was patriotic or not patriotic. I could go either way with it. Yeah. I had the same read of it because I don't know if he was saying I'm sorry. It was almost like he was apologizing to him because he knew no matter what decision he made, he was going to disappoint some of them. He couldn't make
Right.
everybody standing there happy.
Yeah, and maybe that is what he was trying to get at. Yeah.
That was what I finally came up with, was that he was looking at all those different people and he said, no matter what I do, some of these people are going to feel like I betrayed them. And at that point, the subject became betrayal. Instead of cowardness in terms of him can't win, you know, no matter what decision he makes, he's going to feel guilty no matter what he does. It shifts around why. It goes from cowardness to betrayal to just outright raw human fear, you know.
Right.
And so at that, my reading of that finally tied into the main reading of guilt, and that he was bound to betray somebody no matter what he did.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take it as far as naming each one of those persons and how he might betray
Right.
because of their historical. But I bet you could if you wrote a paper on this. I bet you could. And how that they're all watching him. He's got everybody's this audience, and so there's this sort of like this public shame he's got to walk. Either way, there's this public shame that he's exposing himself to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
And he can run as far and as high and as wide as he wants, but there is no escaping it. It's interesting, isn't it, how he was able to do that?
So I have to get going because I have to drive to work. But I'm gonna put it on mute, and I'm still gonna listen just in the car and everything on my drive. But yeah, I'm loving it so far. I'm loving everything.
You know, the thing of it is that at that point it almost becomes like it's a witness. He's become this person that he's going to be that it'll somehow, like, he knows that this war is going to go down in history, and that he's going to bear witness to it on a historical level significance. You know, it's like somebody once asked me, when Trump got elected, I went on all of the protests, and people were like, why are you? And I'm like, my friends are like, why are you going on that protest? And I answered what Thoreau answered to Emerson, or maybe Emerson to Thoreau, I get it backwards, who was protesting slavery and wouldn't pay his taxes. And one of them looked at the other and said, what are you doing in jail? And he goes, why aren't you in jail? And so I just told my friends, why aren't you protesting? That's the real question, not why am I? And but I was telling them, it's not that we're saying let's disrupt a peaceful transaction of power, but we're saying we're celebrating our right to free speech, and also we're going to be a footnote, no pun intended. But I tell people I want to be that part of that footnote in history that said not everybody voted for Donald Trump, and not everybody was for this war that Bush got us in, you know. And so sort of kind of going along with that he wanted to be that footnote in history, but he just didn't have the guts to do it. So he went on to war like everybody else, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting because I know there were people like who wanted to go on those protests, but they wouldn't do it because there was what people would think. And I thought, what?
Yeah.
I was just the opposite. I was worried what my friends, my people who knew me would think if I didn't go, you know?
Totally.
Okay, let's move. Good, very good. Good job. Thank y'all. Thank you, Bobby. You're a good reader.
Thank you.
What about drinking coffee elsewhere? Now, this one, well, in both of them, the title is dispersed throughout it. But I think this thing's a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit, the story's not any more difficult to read in terms of what's happening and keeping up with it. But what it's trying to tell us, I think, is. And
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. I came up with several, but one I came up with was that poverty is a state of mind. And Marx was why we never can really get out of our class, no matter how hard we try, because it's a mindset. We're always going to think like a poor person, you know, no matter how many scholarships we get to Harvard or whatever.
Right.
Or you can never really escape your class. And you're always going to see yourself as you grew up if you were oppressed, you know. Well, and I suppose you would probably always see yourself as you grew up if you were rich, too. I'm sure that Prince William has no idea what it's like to be hungry, you know, or Prince.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So they probably always see themselves as wealthy as well.
Well, and I thought that kind of brings up the fact too of like writing within your experience. We've kind of talked about it before, and how, especially in short story, like there's just that big debate of, can you write as someone that you aren't? Are you allowed to kind of bring up someone else's experience? And with, I don't know, I feel like, let's see, it was last semester, it was in my Living Writers course. And it came up because someone had written part of a story that was just really far away from who they were. And a lot of people were upset about it and saying, like, that's not that guy's experience, and he shouldn't be kind of claiming that experience when he has no real idea of what those people go through. So I thought it was interesting that Packer at the beginning really worked in pretty quickly what the situation was at the college, and made us very aware of who the speaker was and what type of position the narrator was in, not only as she was within society, but also within the way she saw herself.
That's a very good point, because it made us empathize with her right off the bat. It didn't. It got rid of all of those issues that you just discussed. Although the author could still be very different than the narrator.
Right. And
but still,
what I liked was she just did it in kind of an artful way, just giving not so subtle where you're like, oh my gosh, who is this person? But she didn't just say, here's who I am in the first paragraph and give like a rundown of herself. She just like slipped in these tiny, like she says, there was one other Black person in the circle. She says,
isn't that great done? Like a beginning writer would have said, I was the only Black person. And it's such a
right. It was just these subtle little things that I thought were just really cool ways of letting us know who's speaking without just kind of throwing it in our face.
What did you?
Sorry, I have to chime in a little bit here, even though I'm driving. Just on that note, I agree, and I think there are like definitely respectful, ways of doing it where you can write from another perspective, and just like we're talking about, this definitely was one of the ways that it could have been done, and it was done in I think a respectful way and an appropriate manner.
I thought the only part I got felt like I missed something was I couldn't figure out why she said that. I got real confused when her Heidi was telling her the story about her mom owning that car, and then Heidi stops, remember, when they were laughing about the stuff growing in the back of it. Where is that? And then the narrator says, well, we had a car like that too, or what was that? But then she lies to her therapist. Well, one of the things about this is this idea of drinking coffee elsewhere, that she's never going to be able to be who she is. That's the whole point of that title. And I thought the ending should have been let me in instead of open up. And I don't know if y'all caught it or not, but let me in means more than open the door. Let me in. Let me in. Come on, let me in. And then at the end when it says open up, it has it also has sexual connotations. Let me in and open up, Yeah. That's what grad school teaches you to read, that kind of stuff. But it means open up emotionally, which we know the narrator's not ever going to really learn how to do, because she spends the whole story lying, protecting herself, and Heidi catches her. She calls her on it. But when she says, I saw Heidi says, Heidi says, we had this car, and when my parents were getting divorced, my mother bought a car, a used one, an Eldorado. It was filthy. It looked like a huge crushed can coming up the street. She kept trying to clean it out, blah, blah, blah. We had one of those. I thought I was sure ours was, even though I thought for sure ours was an Impala. So she wants to tell Heidi, we had one of those too. I guess to let her know I grew up poor too. So Heidi wouldn't feel bad about being poor is all I can gather from that. And then Heidi continues and says, one day I spit cantaloupe seeds on the floor, and a few days later they started sprouting up, and I started laughing. And then I saw my mother was and she stops. And the narrator says, we could have gotten a better, Heidi goes, the narrator says, she didn't finish. So what? So sad, so awful. Heidi looked at me with what seemed to be a renewed vigor. We could have gotten a better car, eh? Is what Heidi says. We could have gotten a better car, hey? And then the narrator says, it's all right. It's not a big deal, I said. And I don't get why was that so bad? Of course, this was the wrong thing to say. What did I missed something there. What'd y'all get out of that? And then she goes and tells her therapist that she said her mother died too, as well as Heidi's. Did y'all have a problem with that passage?
For me, I just kind of, I didn't like dive too deep into that one there, but I see what you're saying though. Like, why is it that important? But I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out. Bobby, did you have any insights on it?
No, I'm trying to
because
find
then
that
the narrator goes,
again.
of course that was the wrong thing to say. Because she goes, it's all right. It's not a big deal, I said. It's like maybe Heidi could have got a better car. And then the narrator's like, well, you don't have to admit that you could have got a better car, and calling me poor. Maybe that was it. Maybe she was saying, well, you don't have to rub it in that I was poor. You know how if you tell somebody you grew up poor, and if they say, oh, I grew up poor too, you identify with them a little bit. You don't want them to say, oh, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there was she's just such a sarcastic character.
Yeah, yes. Maybe that was it. It was just pure, yeah.
But so often throughout it seems like kind of without remorse.
Almost always without remorse.
Yeah. So.
But at the end, I guess another thing of it could be careful what you do to other people, because it comes back to haunt you. She clearly wants her back at the end. She clearly misses.
Right.
Clearly.
Absolutely.
So she paid a heavy price for that. I love it when the dean tells her, perhaps we'll splurge for some manners as well. What is some of y'all think the theme was?
I feel like at the beginning it seemed to lay on kind of heavy with the idea of not. It's hard for me to explain, but it's like it definitely brought me back to my undergrad and this feeling of and even like high school and stuff, and just that not really having that sense of belonging and
yes.
struggling with it, and always that temptation of okay, well maybe I'm just a deeper person and I'll just kind of plunge into my own solitude and that will be my identity. But she kind of makes us believe it. And then it, like you said, it kind of reverses at the end where it's pretty obvious that she wants to have Heidi there. And
yes.
So it's like embrace your identity and embrace yourself, but also understand that you can be an individual and still benefit from the love of others and the company of others.
Yeah. Clearly she's not comfortable in her own skin, and it's not because it's black. She's just not comfortable with who she is. Hi, how are you?
Hello?
How are you? Hello.
Hi, hold on. Sorry.
You have children?
I was in the silent zone of the library.
Oh. How we were just talking about the themes in the two stories and kind of going in with them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know if you guys were talking about. I just joined. I just jumped in right now. I didn't know if you guys were discussing any of
We're
the.
doing drinking coffee elsewhere.
Oh, okay. Let me pull it up.
Do you think the story? Do you think that the narrator's right and that Heidi really has never had sex? You know, when she says it occurred to me later that she had never had sex either. Do we ever get the narrator's name? Can't remember.
Yeah, it's Dina, right?
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Get it right up front. You're right. It's my bad. She alludes a lot to, like, there's a famous poem about stop the clock. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it. When somebody dies, everything needs to stop. I told Dr. Rayborn how I meant to tell Heidi that my mother had died, that I knew how one evening, that how one eventually accustoms oneself to the physical world's lack of sympathy. The buses that are still running late, the kids who still play in the street, the clocks that won't stop ticking for the person who's gone. That's an allusion to a famous poem. The buses need to stop, the kids need to quit playing. My lover has died. Are y'all familiar with it? It comes up in 4 Weddings and a Funeral.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
I'll lose my PhD for not remembering the author, but I can't. What do y'all think about the first person for this story? Do you think that's appropriate, or we lose a little something?
I felt it was appropriate. I felt it was risky.
Yeah, yeah, it works though, doesn't it?
Yeah, but her writing is just so it's really honest, and then I don't think it could work in third person because we get the contrast of her ironic, sarcastic, and kind of spiteful personality, but we get these little glimpses through the narration and how she portrays her thought process. We get these like little glimpses of empathy, and I don't think we could get that in third person. If we read her in third person, I think she'd just come off like kind of a jerk.
She
and
would,
we wouldn't get that other side.
And we wouldn't realize that she was also lying to herself.
Exactly. I think everything would be lost.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that she still refers to that person as the guy with the nice shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else want to say anything? I'm sorry, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Araya?
Yeah, Araya. Mm-hmm.
Araya. Did you want to say anything?
No, not right now. Sorry, it's hard for me to talk, but I just.
Okay. That's okay. Don't worry. What was interesting, I thought, probably more so, although it's hard to measure good literature against each other. And I thought that this story, even though it was a little bit more difficult to discuss the themes, it was much richer thematically. And I can't really say why. I don't know why. It just seemed like it was more, wow. But I guarantee you, being a writer, I know she struggled with ending that, let me in. But she decided to end it open up, because twice during the story, Heidi comes to her door both times and bangs and says, let me in. But at the end, when she envisions her coming in, she has her say, open up. And I thought that's interesting that she changes what Heidi says. Because in the actual story, both times she says, let me in. And here again, when the narrator, when Deanie imagines her saying it, she imagines her saying, open up. So I thought that was a little bit beating me over the head with the whole open up, let me in. You know, psychologically, open up to me.
Yeah.
It may not have been so obvious. I just noticed it because I'm thinking about, wow, as a writer, I would have gone back to that "Let Me In," but then I thought about it and said, oh, I know why she didn't. She wanted to change that. She wanted to hit it home that she was talking about emotionally. And both of those
Yeah.
phrases were something you would say to somebody emotionally. You might say
It
to your
was-
spouse, "Let me in," or "Open up," if you're having a discussion with them and they won't say anything.
Yeah, there was a reason to kind of disrupt
Yeah.
that pattern that she had created.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? If it had been a sloppy writer, we'd have known it was a mistake somehow. Isn't that interesting how you can just tell?
Hmm.
What I usually tell students is that it's like banging on the piano. Even if you've never heard a song before, you know if it's really a song and it's pretty music, if somebody's playing a piano in another room. But you also know if they're just banging on the piano. And I think that's a pretty good analogy to how writing fiction works. If in the hands of an inexperienced writer that didn't know what she was doing, you would have been able to tell that was a mistake, right? But like Bobby said, you knew there was a reason she did it because she's too strong of a writer. If something sounds a little bit out, one or two notes sounds a little bit out of the key in a great song, you know it's done on purpose.
Hmm.
But if the whole song's they're just banging on the piano, well then you're not going to circle two that are out and say, you know what I'm saying?
So if she were a student, it's like she doesn't have that, maybe that kind of natural reputation that lets those things appear more as artistic choice rather than error. So how would you handle that if you saw it?
What do you mean?
Like if she was one of your students instead of a famous.
I don't care who it is. They either know how to write a really good story or they don't.
Right.
That's why I use the analogy. The person's in the other room playing the piano. You don't even know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't even want to say a student because maybe they're a good writer. Maybe they've read a lot. I've had many students in creative writing, and I read their story, and I think, oh my God, this is amazing.
Right.
I got to talk to this person. I want to know, have they read a lot? How did they learn how to do this? It was just raw talent. Some of that,
Right.
Unfortunately, you can't teach. But
No,
it's not that she has a natural reputation and she has the ability to make mistakes. That's not it at all. Because if this were sloppy work, even if it were John Updike, he wouldn't be able to get away with it.
I see.
So
So
it's
you're
not
saying,
based on reputation. It's based on the piece as a whole.
okay.
Looking
okay.
at the piece. Let me rephrase that. I use the playing the piano metaphor because they're in the other room playing it. You don't even know who they are, but you have to listen to the whole song. And you're sitting in the other room trying to talk to somebody. You can tell. If you've ever experienced this, you know if they're just banging on the piano and it's some immature person who doesn't know what they're doing or some drunk person, or whether it's somebody who really knows how to play the piano, right? You can hear the difference.
Right. I got
Well, the
you.
same
So
is true with good writing. You could take the name of it off, and if you know how to tell good writing from bad writing, which comes from reading, people who read a lot know this. The average person just knows it. You can just tell, but you would look at the whole story as a whole. So you might take her name off of this and turn this in as a student of mine, and I would say, oh my God, this is brilliant, this is amazing, this is great, and I would know that ending wasn't a mistake. But I judge it not whether they're a student of mine or whether they're a published famous author. I judge it on the story as a whole. Does that make sense?
Okay. That makes sense now that I see,
You
like,
sure?
reading it within the context of everything else. Like you were saying, like if it was a musician and they're playing something incredibly beautiful and they do something that makes the listener go like, wait, what was that? And it sounds like if someone else did the same thing, you might be like, oh, sounds like they messed up, but because they've established themselves in that piece.
Let me rephrase my metaphor. I got to rewind. I'll have to redo this video because I just messed that metaphor up. If somebody else did it, they would be making mistakes all over the place.
Right. No. I understand.
That was my point.
Yeah.
If
Exactly.
somebody else was playing it, there would be so many mistakes in it that you would know that those two notes that sounded a little funny were mistakes.
Right. Exactly.
But
I totally
the song
understand.
is really, really beautiful, but then there's two mistakes. You would think, but that doesn't make sense. See what
Yeah,
I'm saying?
those seem so intentional. Like it must have been an artistic choice, not
Yes.
an error,
Okay.
because
But-
everything around it is beautiful.
Yeah, looking
I got you.
looking at the
Mhm.
story or the piano piece or the painting as an entity of itself. Take everything out of it, the background, the author, everything, except the viewer. You following me?
Yeah.
Now, let me
Mhm. I
rephrase
got
that
you.
a minute. You might still say that it's a mistake if everything else is perfect. Like I might still say that she should have ended that with "let me in" instead of "open up." I might,
Right.
but then I'm going to say, but at least it makes me think about it a little more. Where if everything in the story wasn't well thought out, I would just say they didn't give it enough thought to think about using that again. Like you just said, she obviously clearly thought about it.
Right. Right.
You get it?
No, I totally understand that.
I mean, I've read stories. I've been doing this many years, and I've read stories. I'm going to tell you about 20% of them, the author has clearly not given it any thought. Clearly.
Hmm.
Throughout the whole story. And it just shows from page 1 on. They're banging on the piano next door. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
But no, I don't ever look at, when I read y'all's stories, I'm wanting it to be a great story. I want every story to be the best, and I want y'all to be the very best writer you can be. You know, I'm not looking at it like, oh, these are just beginning people and they're not gonna. No, I'm hoping, because I've had some amazing students that I still keep in touch with over 20, 30, 10, 5 years.
Wow.
Because we still email each other our work and help each other. And you know, but the first story I read of theirs, many writers, I go, oh my God, this is just amazing. Usually it's people who've read a lot. They've read a lot. But you know what? If everybody has to start somewhere, and I'm trying to just take a few steps back and look at this as more a starting place. It's hard online because you're not in the classroom where you can see each other's stories. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
You know, I'm just I'm twisting my neck sometimes thinking, I just wish I could get all of you in a classroom and just say, look, let me show y'all this. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right. Yeah.
But I can't do that. So I've got to work on how I'm going to figure out how some teaching tools.
Yeah. No, it's definitely very, very different.
It is.
One other just kind of formatting question I had before we close up was on like when specifically in I'm totally blanking on the title right now. The last piece we were talking about, the coffee.
Drinking coffee elsewhere.
Yeah, sorry, drinking coffee elsewhere. Specifically in that one, they're kind of like those little section breaks.
Oh.
You know, how
Okay.
would
glad you
you?
asked.
Yeah.
Let me tell you
for
what
like
my
time
feeling
jumps
about
or
those.
whatever.
One of the banging on the piano, people who bang on the piano use those as a crutch because they don't know how to find a good transition.
Mm.
People who have thought about it and know what they're doing use them for a reason, because they want to show an extra break in time, or they want to really stress that we're changing scenes and we're going a completely different direction or something. But if you're banging on the piano, you'll use them all the time just because you don't want to take the time to make a good transition. Typically, I tell my students to stay away from them because they can't take the place of good transitions. And I'm starting to see them a lot in contemporary published fiction, and it bothers me because I think we're starting to dummy everything down. I mean, stuff I'm seeing on online writing posts are just awful. Awful. If you go to all these creative writing sites and what people are writing, it's just awful. And I'm not trying to be a snob, but it's like there's no gatekeeper. Power to the people. Thank God that the knowledge isn't just for the rich white people, you know, thank God. Or the rich white males, I should say. But the problem with this is there's no gatekeeper to knowledge and stories, so they're everywhere. These bad, horribly written people are banging on the piano on the internet because nobody's there to stop them. You following me? And nobody's standing beside them saying, this is bad piano playing, everybody. Bad piano playing. And so nobody can tell the difference between good piano playing and bad piano playing anymore. And the problem with starting to see those little space marks come up all over fiction a lot really bothers me, because I think that we're dumbing down our art because people don't want to take the time to write a good transition. So the rule I would give you is this. If you're using it for a reason, use it. But if you're using it just because you don't want to take the time to make a transition, like it would be 10 years before Sammy would realize the damage that she did to him that day. 10 years later, Sammy realized his mother really didn't die. She ran off.
Okay.
But a lot of people, a lot of inexperienced writers see people do it and they use it as a crutch because they don't want to look for that transition.
Okay. I see. That makes
But
sense.
if you can answer, every time you use one, be prepared for me to ask you, why are you using this? And if you can answer that question with something besides because I didn't want to look for a transition, then you're probably okay. Let me tell y'all something. As a writer, as a young writer, start making rules for yourself and follow them, and break your habits of bad writing. I have habits in my writing that are bad, and I had a lot more 20 years ago, but I broke them all real fast because my teacher told me, you do not want to break this habit before you get real used to it, Laurie. Break it. And so that is not a habit I would get into. It's a crutch.
Yeah. And yeah, I can see how it would be.
And I'll call people down on it because it's one of my pet peeves. I'm glad you asked about that. But I'm telling you, I think the banging on the piano metaphor is working really well. But here's what's happening. Everybody's banging on the piano on the internet. Nobody's saying, this is piano banging. So somebody else comes and says, oh, they're playing the piano so well. Let me do it just like them. And then we've got more and more bad piano players. And now somebody else comes along and says, let me play the piano like they're doing it. And now we've got even more bad piano players. But y'all are doing pretty good. The interesting is the ones who really need to hear this aren't listening to the videos. And that's another thing I'm going to have to start doing is I think I need to, maybe y'all can give me some feedback at the end of the semester. I'll have a session and y'all wouldn't mind helping me out a little bit on what might work because I think I need to start assessing people on the readings and on the handouts and make sure they're reading it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think?
Yes, there might, be some benefit to that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we measure people like we are ourselves, and I can't imagine not. I was a much better student. A teacher told me to do something. I just did it. It never occurred to me not to do the reading. But I've taught long enough to know that I need to. In the classroom, they're going to read it because they don't want to get called on and be caught not having read it.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they don't read it, they'll hear something by listening to us talk. You know what I'm saying? They'll learn something.
Right, totally.
But the problem I'm having is that people aren't watching the video nor reading. But y'all are, so thank you. All three of y'all are.
Of course, yeah.
So if there's anything I can do to help you, I want to help you. Let me know. If you ever feel like you need to have a Zoom meeting, just email me give me about 4 or 5 choices of time slots, and
Okay.
I'll pick one.
Perfect. Okay.
Because I'm pretty open. Early in the morning works best for me because I'm a caretaker for my husband. I don't want to go into the details. And so early in the morning he's asleep, so I can get a lot of. And early in the morning or late in the evening, usually early in the morning because by this time of the night I'm tired because I'm so stressed out. But early in the morning he's still asleep, and so it's a good time for me.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna turn the recording off. Thank y'all for listening.